Let's talk about layout in a general way, and then we'll dive into the specifics of how do you do layout. I think I've mentioned previously that, that on computers in general, the screen is laid out as a set of rectangles, and there are rectangles inside of rectangles, and rectangles that overlap with other rectangles, and rectangles that are obscured by other rectangles. And you may not even have thought of it this way, but that's the idea of Windows, right? Windows, and not the operating system, but the concept of Windows, are rectangles that show up on the screen. Each of those rectangles has their own individual controls on it for making it bigger, making it smaller. Possibly you can suppress some of that stuff, getting rid of it, moving it around the screen, etc., etc., and those rectangles build the screen. The biggest rectangle is the one that you never see, and it's the full operating system. And only every once in a while, for example, in the Windows operating system, will you see the entire operating system in its own window. For example, if you connect to another computer and you're running that computer on yours and you have your own computer, you don't see the frame. You don't see the frame around your computer's window, but you can sometimes see the frame around the operating system window of the computer that you've connected to. So everything is a rectangle. There's a root rectangle, a rectangle inside which every other rectangle lives. And the same thing that goes for Windows goes for areas inside the windows. We're constantly creating windows themselves as collections of rectangles. Rectangles nested inside of other rectangles, rectangles that define certain screen areas. There's the rectangle of the window itself, and then inside that rectangle there's another rectangular area for sometimes menus. There's a rectangular area at the bottom for a footer or a status bar. There's the rectangular area that defines the scroll bars. There may be rectangular areas for buttons, etc., etc., etc. Anything that isn't a rectangle or appears not to be on a rectangle is an optical illusion. So for example, I can take a rectangle and I can make certain parts of that rectangle transparent. So certain parts of that rectangle you can see behind, and other parts you can't see behind. So if I took a circle, put a circle inside of a rectangle, and made the inside of the circle opaque but the outside of the circle transparent, it would appear that I have a circle on the screen, but in fact I have a rectangle. So that's sort of the fundamental concept of how things are laid out on computer screens, and it maps directly to how things are laid out inside of an HTML page. You create rectangles. And in design terms, you don't really talk about rectangles, you talk about grids. You talk about the lines, the horizontal and vertical lines that describe the screen areas. And so generally speaking, as you design a web page, you create the layout of the web page, you start from the idea of a grid. And what kind of grid is necessary in order to represent all the different areas of the screen. So we have the physical layout of the screen, which is the grid, and then we have the logical layout of the screen, which is the areas. Each area has its own grid position or cell in the grid, or rectangle in the way we were talking about it previously. So I have a series of screen areas, like I want a banner, I want a footer, I want navigation areas, I want a button bar. These are all the different areas of the screen, and I assign each one of those to a grid position. So we have this idea of rectangles. Inside each rectangle goes a screen area, some named area of the screen that I want to target content to. Maybe I want to target navigation, or I want to target an item to it or something like that. And then I have the idea of the grid, which is the overall cross-hatching of the page to divide it into areas. And you have two examples here on your screen that show you those ideas. The first one shows you the idea of screen areas. And so I have a banner area and a nav area and a content area, etc. And I divide the screen visually into those for organization, to keep it all straight, to keep all the different parts of the screen in constant relationship to each other, and to know where a particular kind of information is going to be displayed. Then I have the concept of the grid, which you can see in the second page, where I take the HTML page and I divide it into boxes. And I say, this box has this stuff in it, this box has this stuff in it. At some point, well, actually, the way to think about the relationship between these two images is, notice in the second image that I'm pretty much just working inside of the, or that I have two levels of grid. One level of grid is defining the entire page layout with all those screen areas, and then inside of one screen area, the thing that says, the thing that has the picture of the two little people in it, and it says, what does that say? I can't really read it because of the sun here. But anyway, there's a picture of two people in there. That's one area of the screen. So you would say, for example, that's the content area. In the content area, I'm going to further subdivide this as a grid. And I'm going to have this grid representing the different parts of the content area. And then I'm going to use certain methods in HTML to lay out that grid.